I'm Jennifer Rosado. I used to be a teacher, so I can speak loudly. I'm one of the school counselors here. I work with students in the beginning of the alphabet. I have students A through E for the most part. I'm happy to have you all here tonight. Welcome to Financial Aid Night. We have a wonderful speaker. She is super knowledgeable. This is Marian Hargrave. She has been in admissions for 20 years. She's worked 12 years in financial aid, and she has so much to tell us. After the presentation, there will be lots of time for questions. You might have an opportunity to ask a question during the presentation, but for the most part, we usually do them after. Also, this presentation will be on the website on tigertotalmedia.org, and it will be on NATV. It will run for about 3 to 4 weeks on NATV, starting the week of February 8th. So if you missed anything, you'll have access to the PowerPoint and be able to watch things again and hear the answers to the questions. And if you do have any special circumstances or other questions that you're not able to have answered this evening, you can always email your son or daughter's school counselor, and we can forward the questions to Marian, and she can get back to us, and we can kind of intercede that way too to help you get your specific questions answered. So without further ado, Marian, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here tonight. You have a lot of good information, physical materials available to you to reference after the presentation, and I would encourage that you do that. A lot of the materials are going to give you specifics that I'll sort of cross over tonight, but this one specific thing, if you don't mind, that you might want to make sure you grab tonight would be this, the Student Aid Guide. This discusses all the state aid programs, the federal aid programs, and also federal loan options. So it's a really good piece to reference. So make sure you pick that up either now or before you leave. There's also a brief survey that I've left at the table as well, and that's just helpful for me to take back to the folks in Harrisburg. And if at the conclusion of the evening, if you just want to leave it back where the materials are, or leave it on your table, that's fine, I'll collect those. The one thing that you don't have is my direct contact information, so you're welcome to take down my name and phone number and my email address, and I'll also have this slide back up at the end of the presentation. You'll note that my last name does have an E on it at the end of it, but my email address does not, so that's not a typo, that's actually correct, just to keep things nice and interesting and somewhat confusing. So please take that down. You are welcome to call me directly or email me. Have a little patience with me because this time of the year I'm doing things like this. So I try my best to get back to folks within a day. Sometimes it's immediate if I'm available. Sometimes it's about a day wait, but I'm happy to help you. So just before I start, let me get a sense of who I'm talking to. How many of you are parents of seniors or senior students? All right, so I'm visual. Are there junior families out here? Okay, so it's a little bit mixed. So there are some changes after about 50 years of nothing happening in financial aid. There have been some changes that will be affecting all of you to some extent over the next couple of years, and I'm going to touch base on those. Some of those changes happened so rapidly that not all of our materials could address those changes. So you'll see some supplemental information there. One of them is, do you mind if I steal your stuff? One of which is something called an FSA ID. That came upon us kind of quickly, so I don't think it's in that student aid guide. So we have this supplemental piece to address it. I think my point is that you want to pick up the materials because there's a lot of good information there that you want to reference back here. So without further ado, let's get started with financial aid. And the basics of financial aid. And given the fact that we're in January, and I'm really addressing this presentation most urgently for the families of seniors, now that we're in the January time frame, this is really when, for seniors, financial aid season begins. So just to give you some perspective, probably since July, August, September, October, November, your senior students were visiting schools, they were applying to schools, they may be choosing schools, but now, come January, the real time for applying for financial aid kicks in.
So let's just start with what is financial aid. Obviously, it's funds to help your student cover the costs of their post-secondary institutions. Tonight, I'm talking about 2-year schools, 4-year schools, in-state, out-of-state, private, public, technical programs that can confer federal financial aid. So they're all sort of lumped in when I say the word school or college choice, okay? But there's a real important distinction with financial aid, and that is it can be offered in 2 ways. One of which is merit-based aid, which means aid that is going to be given to your student based on particular characteristics. It could be your student's academic background, their athletic talents, their musical talents, their artistic talents, your race, your religion, your heritage, some specific characteristic that schools are going to want to reward your student for. And merit-based aid has nothing to do with your situation at home financially. It has everything to do with those characteristics that your student presents. Then the other type of financial aid, which is really what I'm going to concentrate on tonight, because I have no idea what characteristics your student possesses, is need-based aid. And need-based aid has everything to do with what's going on financially in your home. So we're going to cover mostly need-based aid. And need-based aid comes first from the federal government, the state of Pennsylvania, which is really who I'm representing because I work for the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. We are the organization in the state that administers the Pennsylvania State Grant and a number of other state programs for Pennsylvania residents. And then also financial aid comes from the schools and colleges themselves. This would be money from their endowment, the biology department award, the chancellor's award, the dean's award, those kinds of programs that each and every school offers. And I would tell you right now, if you have a senior student at home, at this point you don't want to discourage your student from looking at any particular school based on costs, because until you engage those schools in the financial aid process, you really don't know what your student's net cost will be. You know what the sticker price of the schools are. But until you engage those schools in the financial aid process, only then will you get down to this is really what it's going to cost your student to attend any particular school. So at this point, I would recommend it's all fair game, right, until we get a little further down the road in the financial aid process. That's particularly true this year of senior students. And again, I'm going to talk about some changes that may affect junior students and beyond. And also scholarship sources. That's a form of financial aid. And I always tell students that you don't have to be a 4.0 student in order to receive a scholarship. Although obviously we would all want our kids to be 4.0 students, but there are scholarships based on any number of characteristics. It could be because your child's left-handed, because they're redheaded, because again of your race, ethnicity, your heritage, right? Because of the profession that a mom or dad has, etc. But there are hundreds of reasons why a student would receive a scholarship. And as I go through this presentation, even if your math skills are poor, you're going to realize that there is not enough need-based aid to send your student to school for a year, let alone 4, right? So any kinds of outside resources that you can bring to this process is really going to be important. Now, having said that, if affordability is not an issue for you, this might be a presentation you don't need to see. If you want to leverage your funds as effectively as possible, you might want to take portions of this presentations as they are effective for you. But this is really about need-based aid, about how to make the most of what's out there from these sources of aid to help your student afford their college choice. And to be very honest with you, sometimes a student's school choice is not affordable for a family. And you have to determine within your family what is affordable for you. And what may be affordable for one family may not be affordable for another. But that is completely your choice. But it's certainly a consideration. So the process of financial aid starts with the thing called the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, and every school requires the free application for federal student aid. A couple of things about the FAFSA. Even if you believe you might not qualify for any types of federal student aid, I would still encourage you to complete the FAFSA because every school utilizes this information to leverage their funds. So they'd like to know what's going on in your home financially in order to provide any kind of need-based and, in most cases, merit-based aid to your student. And what I tell families all the time, and this I know to be true, is every school has some sort of money available to them. Some of the schools have big pots of money, some schools have small pots of money, but all of the schools, no matter the size of the pots of money that they have, they're going to tell you they don't have enough money. So they try and use what they do have as effectively or as efficiently as possible. And so they use the information that you provide on the FAFSA for that purpose. So I would encourage all of you to complete the FAFSA no matter what you might think about the process. Now, this year, for students who are currently seniors, presently seniors, who would be going to school in the year 2016, the FAFSA became available to them on January 1st. The FAFSA has always been available on January 1st for the last 50 years. And that is because for the last 50 years, financial aid has been based on the prior year. So if your child is going to school in 2016, the information you place on the FAFSA is from 2015, the prior year. However, beginning for your junior families, beginning next year for students attending school in 2017, the government is moving towards what might change as far as a term, but is presently called prior year. So for students beginning school in 2017, the information you place on the FAFSA will also be from the income year of 2015. Students attending school in 2018 will be placing information on the FAFSA from 2016, and so on. Now, the purpose for that, just to give you some explanation, the purpose of prior year is this. Senior families, I bet you have some students out there who've already decided where they're going, right? Usually they've already bought the shirts from the bookstore, they have all the caps, right? They watch the football games, they think they know where they're going, and yet they won't for months know what it's going to cost them. So that is to say, or that would be like me going to a showroom to look at a car, driving that car off the lot, saying, I'll take it, let me know in 4 or 5 months what it's going to cost me. Right? Same sort of thing. It's sort of an illogical process that we've all sort of bought into. And that will be changing beginning next year because the FAFSA for juniors and beyond will be available as of October 1st. So it aligns this financial aid process a little bit more closer to the choice or the buy. Right? So now, next year, students, when they look at that car and they drive it off the lot, the distance between that choice and the cost of that choice is not going to be months. Right? So the federal government has made the FAFSA beginning next year available October 1st. This year for seniors, still January. Next year for juniors, October 1st. Yes, ma'am.
So for current seniors, for their sophomore year, will it be prior year or prior year?
That's a great question. So for current seniors, it's a grandfathered process. You actually will be placing 2015 information twice. Currently for your senior as they begin their freshman year in college, and then again when they become sophomores in school. And after that one blip, it's sort of going to catch up. Okay? So that's the main point of prior year. The other thing is this, and I'll get into it down the road, but it takes care of some practical issues when you can look at prior year information. And we'll talk about that. So all schools require the FAFSA. And the FAFSA can be found at fafsa.gov. You want to make sure that if you would do a Google search, that what you come up with actually ends in GOV for government. That is the site that will not charge you money to complete the FAFSA. There are other sites out there that will receive FAFSA information, but they will charge you, and those sites do nothing more for you. There's no advantage to paying to complete this thing we call the free application for federal student aid. So you want to make sure you go to the right website, FAFSA.gov.
I was just going to say that if you Google FAFSA, the first couple of responses or the first few sites that come up are not FAFSA.gov. So make sure you memorize FAFSA.gov. Don't just stick it into a Google search because you'll end up paying for it.
And again, the cost is it's significant, but it makes no difference on the prospect of the application. And you waste your time. You'll get to the end of it and think, I'm not going to pay for that. And you just waited 40 minutes completing it, or wasted 40 minutes completing it. So make sure you get to the right site. Also understand that the Pennsylvania State Grant application is a requirement for first-time students. So you'll want to have your student complete the state grant application as well. Now, the state grant application is very brief. It's actually linked to the FAFSA, and I'll talk more about that. But the state grant application's purpose is to get Pennsylvania-oriented information from the FAFSA, which is a federal form, right? So we have specific questions to ask your student because they're Pennsylvania residents. That's the purpose of completing the state grant app. And I would also tell you right now, if your student, particularly seniors, if they're looking at 3, 4, 5 schools, and you feel that strongly that they're going to go out of state, I would still encourage your student to complete the state grant application because you never know what's going to happen over the next couple months. This is somewhat of a honeymoon period with seniors and prospective colleges, and they all look great right now. But you never know how that's going to change down the road. And so not to miss a deadline, complete the state grant application. If your student ends up going out of state, it just disappears. Nothing happens. And you spend 5 minutes completing it. Also on the right-hand side of that slide, you see that some schools also require the CSS profile, which is the College Scholarship Service Profile. The CSS profile is a product of the College Board. So if you have any questions about the CSS profile, I would direct you to that website, collegeboard.org. There's about 18 schools in Pennsylvania that require the CSS profile. They are all private. They would be the Penn, Swarthmore, Muhlenberg, and those are about the only ones that I can actually remember, but there's 18 private schools in Pennsylvania that require it. And if a school requires the CSS profile, they also still require the FAFSA. So if your student's looking at a school that requires that, you want to complete both of those applications. If I had a senior at home, I would rush home and say, are any of those school choices you're looking at requiring the CSS profile? And if they don't know, that's a bad answer. They need to know, right? The CSS profile became available for seniors as of October 1st as well, this year. So that's a process that should have been started. There is a cost associated with the CSS profile. It's $25 just to initiate a record. And then for any school that your student wants to send that record to beyond the first school, there's a $16 fee. Fee waivers are available. Just to summarize, the difference between the FAFSA and the CSS profile is the FAFSA revolves around the student and a filing parent. The CSS profile is a little bit more obtrusive. It revolves around the student and basically anyone else that student knows who could be a financial resource for that student. All right, so it goes out a little bit further. Grandparents might be involved. Anyone else in the household might be involved when you're talking about the CSS profile. But if your student's school choices require the profile, you need to complete it. It's a requirement. So a couple of things about the FAFSA, and that's a little screenshot just to show you what you're going to see when you go on to FAFSA.gov. And just by the way, any senior families actually start the FAFSA yet? All right, very good. Be proud about that so everybody can see there are survivors. Right? You can get through it. A couple of things about FAFSA.gov is that there is skip logic involved with the FAFSA. So most of you are not going to have to suffer through all 200 questions on the FAFSA. 100 for the student, 100 for the parents. Right? Because the skip logic is going to move you through the application based on your preliminary information. So that should be good news. There's also built-in edits that make it difficult to make mistakes. There's also a ton of help on the website. There's a tips and hints box. If you just scroll your mouse over any question that you're having difficulty answering, right, then that box will come up and it will give you a detailed explanation about what's being requested of you. There's also live customer service help at FAFSA.gov, so you can pick up the phone and actually talk to a person, or you can do live chat. So there's tons of help available for FAFSA.gov. And actually, the government estimates it takes about 38 minutes to complete the FAFSA if you were to start and stop it in one sitting. I usually say that statement to see how bitter and jaded everybody is, but I think we have a pretty good group. I've been with families when they complete the FAFSA, it really does not take that long. But the good news is you can start it, save it, stop out of it, and go back to it as many times as you like. So you don't have to do it all in one sitting, okay? And in fact, you should get used to the idea that it's a fluid application. Very few of you are going to go to it one time, get it done, and not have to go back. And there's a couple reasons for that. Senior parents, how many times have your students changed their school choices? Right? Back in October, there were 3 popular schools. Maybe today there's 5. Maybe today there's 2. But they've changed along the ways. So that might be one reason you go back to the FAFSA, is to change those school choices. And also, many of you are going to go back to the FAFSA in order to correct financial information. So on that screenshot you see, what's circled is start a new FAFSA, which is where everybody's going to start, but then there's also a login. And that's for you to go back into the form and make any changes that you or your student needs to make. So deadlines are critical. Now we know that the FAFSA this year is available January 1, next year October 1. So that's when you can begin completing the form. What is your deadline? Your deadline really is based on your student's school considerations. So if your student is looking right now, particularly seniors, looking at 4 or 5 different schools, every one of those schools has promoted on their website a preferred FAFSA filing deadline. And your student should know what those deadlines are, because those are the deadlines your student wants to meet in order to list their school choices on the FAFSA. So that is to say, your kid can list 10 schools on the FAFSA that they're thinking about. They don't have to have applied to those schools. They don't have to have been accepted to those schools. These are just, or they might, but these are just considerations that your kid has as far as where they're going to attend. Right? But every one of those schools has a preferred deadline, and what those deadlines mean is this. If your student gets the FAFSA information to those schools by those deadlines, then those schools can meet your best financial aid package. Now, if your student submits a FAFSA after a particular school deadline, the schools will certainly still accept the FAFSA, right? They'll accept it months beyond those deadlines. But the further away your student gets from those deadlines, the less likely it is that they're going to realize their best financial aid package at those schools. Because in theory, whether you know it or not as the public, as soon as those deadlines occur for a particular school, they begin speculating on how they're going to disperse their financial aid. And the later along your student comes, the more likely it is that that money has already been dispersed. Not practically, not physically, but in their speculation. So you want to really meet those deadlines. And again, there's no advantage to coming in prior to those deadlines, but you certainly want to meet those deadlines. So just for full disclosure, so you know, the Pennsylvania State Grant also has our own deadlines for the state grant application, and that is May 1 or August 1, depending on the type of school your student is considering. So again, I say this is for full disclosure because certainly you're going to want to have your students FAFSA in by May 1, right? Because that's awfully late in this whole process. But just keep that in mind. We do have our own deadlines as well. So this is just a graphic to show you those changes that I mentioned to you as far as when a student applies and what tax information you're going to use or income information you're going to use for the FAFSA. So a couple basic principles about federal financial aid, and actually state aid. And that is this process revolves around the student and their parents, or parent. So while parents are not obligated to the student's school costs, you're not. But to every extent possible, a student needs to provide parental information on the FAFSA. So, unless your student is one of these things, and I'm guessing they're not, as we stand here in a high school. They're not over the age of 24, they're not a veteran, they don't already possess a bachelor's degree, they don't support a dependent, they may have a dependent, that happens, but they don't probably support another dependent. So those are the stipulations and the others that you see there that make a student automatically independent. Anybody with these kinds of characteristics does not have to provide parental information on the FAFSA. So I'm guessing parents, you're going to want to see who draws the short straw and who's going to be the filing parent for the student. Okay? Now, we all come from interesting families, so if a student is coming from a home where the parents both live in that home, whether they be married or not, then either of those parents can decide to be the filing parent on the FAFSA. Again, who draws a short straw, and I'll help the kid file the FAFSA, right? So in a married situation or where two parents are together, one parent assumes the responsibility to represent both parents' information. But if a student is coming from a divorced home, the rule is, in that case, the parent whose information goes on the FAFSA would be the parent for whom the student has lived with the most in the prior year. So, the student is from a divorced family. Who did they live with the most in 2015? That's whose information goes on the FAFSA. A lot of parents say, well, the student lived with both of us equally. We share physical custody. All right? So, we take space out of that, or custody out of that equation, then which parent provided more monetary support? And it could be that Susie lived with mom and dad equally, but mom pays for car insurance, all the activities at school, right, et cetera, et cetera. So mom is the monetary support bearer. That's whose information goes on the FAFSA. And it does not matter in any case who actually claims the student for tax purposes. So, Susie could provide mom's information on the FAFSA legitimately, but dad could claim the student for tax purposes. That's fine. Doesn't matter. Never comes into play. Now there's step-parents are also involved. Easy way for me to explain this is Susie now lives with dad and dad has remarried. Then dad's information is on the FAFSA and so is stepmom's information on the FAFSA. So step-parents assume that burden as well. Adoptive parents are treated just like biological parents, no difference there. But kids who are in a little bit of a gray area are students who have foster parents, legal guardians, or students who are living with someone other than their biological parents. for whatever reason. So that's the last 3 entries that you see on that slide. Those kids fall into a gray area, which means that those students can't provide parental information for legitimate reasons, but they're also not independent by definition of that basic characteristics, right? Those students have to complete the FAFSA simply with student information. Then they must work with their school choice to determine why is it that you can't, or how can you document that you can't provide parental information. So I go into that lengthy definition because I never know who I'm talking to, and I never know who you might know who might have this situation. So that's how that's handled. And what happens with students in those situations is that the school works out why is it that you can't provide parental information. Sometimes it's testimony from the school counselors. It could be from a social services agency or a clergy person, right? To determine, yeah, this is why Susie's separated from parents. Sometimes it's emotional abuse, physical abuse, abandonment by the parents, incarceration, right? So that's the story on whose information goes on the FAFSA. Are there any questions about that? Because sometimes that's a sticking point. All right, good. I have to tell you, NA parents, you already have that financial aid place. Come on. Come on. We're only a little bit ways through. This is the effect I have on people. It's not gratifying at all. So remember that students list on the FAFSA up to 10 schools. They can take some schools out, add other schools. They can change that ad nauseum. And every time they change their school choice, that change is recorded by all the schools so they have an understanding. Now, just a point of clarification. A couple years ago, there was a lot of questions from families, not just here, but everywhere, about how students should list their school choices on the FAFSA, because there was some perception, and I think rightfully so, that when schools saw how they were ranked in that list of choices, it gave the appearance that maybe they were adjusting their aid packages based on that ranking, right? Number 1 was going to be very attentive, and choice number 9 was not. So the federal government this year has changed that for that reason, because that perception might be accurate. And so now the only schools that will see your student's information are the schools that your student listed, but they're not going to see the other schools that the student has listed. So you don't have to rank them alphabetically. You don't have to rank them in any particular way to make sure that the schools are packaging your student correctly. However, the Pennsylvania State Grant Program only has a mechanism to address the very first school listed on the FAFSA. So, what I would tell you is this: if your student has a clear number 1 choice, even if that number 1 choice changes, always make that change to appear on the FAFSA list as number 1. In-state or out-of-state, doesn't matter. Okay? So, and that's always been the case with FIA, but that masking of school choices has just occurred this year. So this is the information that your student might need, or you might need, along with your student, to complete the FAFSA. Take a gander at this fun list of information. And if you're a senior family, some of this might be troubling to you, because as you go down that list, we're mentioning income information from 2015, one of which is the W-2s. Mine just became available electronically today. I was notified. But some of us don't get our W-2s until the end of February, which is when we must get them, right? So if your student has a preferred filing deadline at a particular school of maybe February 15th, which is pretty quick now, you might or might not have your W-2s. You certainly are not going to have your tax information completed. So senior families in particular, you're probably going to be in a position then where you're going to have to estimate on your FAFSA in order to meet the school's deadline and provide them the information that pertains from this list to you. And that is perfectly fine. In fact, it's encouraged. The object of this game is to get your information to the schools by those deadlines. So if you're in a position to estimate, what you can do is take some pretty good guesses. You can use your 2014 tax information. You can use your last pay stub to answer the questions on the FAFSA, all of which is acceptable. There's a question on the FAFSA that you'll be asked, which is, have you filed your taxes? Will you file your taxes for 2015? Or do you not file at all, which is legitimate in some cases. So when you answer, we will file, and yet you complete a FAFSA, that's a clue or a cue to the system that what those schools are receiving is estimated information. Because really, until you file your taxes, it's all kind of funny money. Right? So do not be afraid to estimate. Now, junior families, you're not going to be in this position because students attending school in 2017 are going to report 2015 information. So they're certainly going to know what 2015 information was. Another advantage to that change that the federal government made is that you won't have to estimate if you're a junior family. Now, the bottom line is, senior families, if you need to estimate to meet a school's deadline, the most important thing is that you must go back and correct that information when you have it available. So conceivably when your taxes are done. Go back in, change the answer to that question that we have filed, and then go from there. Okay? So when you sign, and at this point of the presentation, we're just talking about getting through the FAFSA application. When you finally answer all the questions on the FAFSA, you'll need to sign it. And in order to sign it, you'll need to create what's called an FSA, Federal Student Aid ID. Let me just ask, have any of you parents been through this process before and maybe you had a PIN, a personal identification number? All right, so if you already had a PIN, you want to go into the FSA ID website and link that PIN to an FSA ID that you're going to create. So the ID has replaced the PIN. For those of you who've never been through this process before, you don't know what the heck I'm talking about with a PIN, disregard that. You need to create an FSA ID. The ID must be for the student and for the parent. And both the student and the parent must have unique email addresses. And theoretically, the parent should not create the ID for the student, and the student should not create the ID for the parent. And we recommend that you create the IDs at least 3 days in advance of starting and or signing the FAFSA, because the IDs need to be authenticated. Your social security numbers are going to get run through a process, Homeland Security, blah, 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 and so they have to be authenticated. So you don't want to create it instantaneously. Now you can do that, and what you see from that screenshot is an icon at FAFSA.gov. So you can actually create the ID from within the FAFSA. And if you do that, I'll give you $100. If it doesn't happen, that the FAFSA will time out while you're creating your ID. So don't do that. Go to fsaid.ed.gov, which is just the direct site. Create the thing. Rest on your laurels for about 3 days and then go back to FAFSA.gov and actually utilize the ID. From experience, since this thing has been in existence since May, that is the path of least resistance. Now, junior families, it's a bit early to create the FSA ID. You might want to wait until later on this spring, because if you don't activate the thing or utilize the ID, it will deactivate on you. So it's a little early for junior families. Yes, ma'am?
If you have older children, do you want to link that account to this ID, or you want a new one?
If you have older children who are currently in school, those in college, those students should have created their own FSA ID by now. If they haven't, they should. But certainly as a parent, you want to go ahead and create the FSA ID. It will still know you have students who are in college and also a student who's coming up. So that is to say, you lead me to this, a good answer. Parents, if you've got more than one child, maybe you're here tonight for a senior, but you've got an upcoming sophomore, your FSA ID will always remain the same. That's you. But each student that you have will have a unique FSA ID. And the purpose of the IDs was to bolster security. And it's a little bit of a process to create it. You have to complete 3 challenge questions. You have to create 2 of your own. You have to indicate a momentous date in your life that cannot be your birthday. Imagine what 17 and 18-year-olds do with this. It's big fun, but it's a good idea. And also the FSA IDs allows your student down the road to access all the important federal websites related to financial aid, their student loans, etc., to sign a master promissory note if they take out a student loan, etc. Okay? So once you create those, you want to keep them someplace secure so you remember them. And once you sign the FAFSA, you will receive a confirmation page online. So I have a lot of families say, did I do it? Am I done? You're going to know because you're going to receive a confirmation page. And that confirmation page is going to show you at the bottom of it, this short slide doesn't, or screenshot doesn't show it, but at the bottom of the confirmation page are all the schools your student listed, the graduation rates at those schools, which by the way are based on 6 years. So don't get excited when you see 90% of the students graduate from blah, blah, blah in 6 years. So make note of that because I think that's really important. My former work and enrollment, you know, you can connect a lot of dots when you see how many kids are graduating from these schools. You'll also see how many students leave after the first year and how many students transfer. Right? So you can make a couple of good, really, assumptions about a school if you see everybody's flying out of there after the first year. What you see on this slide circled is the link to the Pennsylvania State Grant application. So the state grant application is linked to this federal form, and because it's a federal form and all states have this link, you know, FIA can't put in a fun logo so you can identify that this is that link for the state grant. It simply says, optional feature, do you want to start your state's grant application? We would prefer you use this link to get to the Pennsylvania State Grant app. Okay, because FAFSA easily talks to the systems at FIA, but it's really easy to miss, and it's not your fault. So if you miss that link from the FAFSA, the alternative is to have your student complete their state grant application directly from FIA.org. However, it takes about 48 hours for your FAFSA information to be electronically provided to FIA. And by that, I am trying to say that if you breeze through the confirmation page, right, and get out of it, it will never appear again. You won't be able to get back to that link. And so you might attempt to go into FIA.org immediately to create the state grant application, while FIA still won't know your student exists until 48 hours later. So if you miss that link, again, take a couple days, rest on your laurels, and then go back to FIA.org. Or ultimately, if you forget that as well, FIA will notify your student. We basically say, we've received a FAFSA for you, you're a Pennsylvania resident, wouldn't you like to create a Pennsylvania state grant application? So we'll notify your kids eventually. I don't like to have families have to wait for that, so you know what the alternative is. The most important questions on the state grant application would be what county of residence your student lives in, and also whether or not you possess a Pennsylvania 529. Okay, and I'll tell you in a minute why that's important, but those are the two most important questions. And also, have you been a resident of Pennsylvania, and how long? So now there's this other thing called the IRS data retrieval tool, which is really important for senior families, because if you're in the position to estimate your information, and remember I said if you do that, which is fine, you have to go back and correct it. You have to go back and tell the FAFSA, I did file my taxes. And when you do that, the FAFSA will present you with a question asking, do you want to use the IRS data retrieval tool? Which means, do you want the FAFSA to import your tax information now into the FAFSA and override everything else you already put in there as an estimate? You would want to do that. Okay? And that's how you make corrections on the FAFSA, senior families. Okay? And when you do that, all of the schools that your student has listed as potential choices then see that the information that they're looking at is actually from the IRS. So it corroborates your income and your tax burden information. So now the schools don't have to worry, is there a mistake here with what you indicated as far as your income and your taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So the IRS data retrieval tool is your friend. Okay? And it's your friend because the schools don't have to manually validate your information, which they don't want to do, and you don't want to have them do that because it's basically like an audit, right? If they have to validate, and just so you know that there's a federal rule that every school must validate at least 30% of their applicants. Some schools validate 100%, right? But at least 30% of people are going to have to suffer through proving their tax information. But when you use the data retrieval tool, that extent is much lesser, much less. Now, junior families, it's not that much of a big deal to you because, again, your kid's going to school in 2017. You're reporting on 2015 information right from the get-go. So the IRS data retrieval tool is available to you immediately. You won't have to estimate. You can simply say, yeah, I filed my taxes for 2015, and yes, I want to use the data retrieval tool, and it just completely imports your information from the IRS into the FAFSA. Yes?
The CSS profile does not have that feature, correct?
No, the CSS profile does not have the data retrieval tool feature. Thank you, good question. Any other questions? Did anybody think they were coming here for comedy night? Anybody wish they came here tonight? All right. I'm sorry, your glaze just gets more and more obvious. All right, so forms are filed, now what, right? You got the application in. Well, then your student receives a student aid report. The aid report comes to them if they provided a valid email address on the FAFSA. If they provided a valid email address on the FAFSA, the SAR, student aid report, will come to them by electronic fashion. If they didn't provide an email address, which I don't recommend, they should provide a valid email address. But if they didn't, the student aid report's going to come to them by mail. And that's a mechanism for you to make any corrections at that point if you'd like. Also, the information goes to the schools and colleges, and it's also, as I mentioned, transmitted to FIA. Okay? There is a second step with the FIA state grant application. That can be down the road at any point in time, but your student should create an account with us. That basically allows them to view the status of their state grant, the processing information, any questions that we may have. But it's not the only mechanism for all of that. FIA communicates that to your student as well, by email. And then when your FAFSA is completed, all those schools that your student has listed, either initially or ultimately, those students or those schools begin to create, this is the speculation that they're doing, they begin to create a cost of attendance for your student. And that is the amount of money it's going to cost your student to attend that school. And cost of attendance can vary by major. For example, art majors tend to have a higher cost of attendance because they need more supplies, right? Science majors tend to have a higher cost because they break things in labs, right? English majors, not so much. They need a library and a couple of books. I can say that because I was a former. So the schools, each school that's still at this point, and we're talking now about spring, latter part of March, April, and so on. Any school that still believes your student is attending there, because a lot of students double deposit, right? So they still might have 3 schools on the line or on the hook that think your student is going to attend there. Those schools are going to begin creating a cost of attendance. And they also, the schools, look at something called an expected family contribution, which is derived from the information that you put on the FAFSA. So let's just look at each of those. Cost of attendance. That includes direct costs or hard costs, the no-brainers. What it costs for your student to attend school. Tuition, room, board, fees, etc. And cost of attendance also includes indirect costs. You know, as parents, what it costs to take or to send a student to school. There's transportation, they need personal items, they need some play money, etc. So the schools build that in together to provide a cost of attendance. This is when you start to get a little closer to what is my student's net cost? What's it really going to cost my student to attend? And the schools look at the EFC. The expected family contribution is a figure from the information you put on the FAFSA. And the EFC does not change from school to school. For example, well, let me just go back and say, the EFC could be, it's an actual number. It could be a 0, which means you demonstrate that you're a very needy family, and it could go all the way up into thousands of dollars. And the further away you are from 0, the less needy you appear to be. Okay? And the EFC does not change from school to school. So if your child is looking at CCAC North and plans to commute, right? And you have an EFC of, I don't know, $6,000. That probably covers the cost of CCAC North. But maybe your student's also looking at, this is a bizarre example, but CMU, which is $65,000 a year. Something like that. Don't quote me, but it's crazy. Your EFC would be exactly the same as CMU. But clearly, what is the difference is the gap between what that EFC is going to cover at a high-costing institution versus a low-costing institution. And that gap is what we're all here for, right? How do we fill in that gap? But just the most important part of the EFC is to understand it doesn't change. No one can change it. No school can affect the EFC. And in theory, it is what you could expect to pay a school, but in reality, it's really not what most parents or families pay an institution. It's a benchmark. It's how the schools can sort of categorize, these are our neediest students, these are our middle neediest students, and these are students that are not needy. And as you go further away from being needy, that's when you really want to rely on merit-based aid. So these are the most important things in calculating, or what is used to calculate the EFC. First of all, you have to know that in theory, that number, the EFC, represents what your student might be able to pay. You're allowed to laugh now. And what you would pay the institution. But just bear in mind, it represents both of you. And the bulk of the EFC comes from your adjusted gross income, what you've indicated on the FAFSA. What is held harmless is the value of your primary residence, the value of your qualified retirement funds, which would be your 401ks, your IRAs, your 403bs, any value of life insurance, tax-deferred annuities that you may have. Those are not part of the equation. They're held harmless. So you don't have to sell your home, liquidate your retirement, etc., in order to put your kid through school. However, assets are also part of the EFC, and everything else is an asset. Your savings, CDs, other investments, other real estate that you may have, bonds, right? Those are all items you're going to report on the FAFSA. and those are considered assets. But there is an asset protection allowance available for parents. So that is to say, the older you are, the more heavily protected other assets, like CDs, savings, blah, 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 the more heavily protected those are. And the max amount that any parent is going to have to be assessed for the EFC contribution would be about 5 to 6%. So it's relatively small. Okay. Right now, the typical parent age for a student going to college is about 46, 47 years old. Those are parents that could be expected to be assessed at about 6%. And then the older you get, the less and less your assets will be assessed in calculating the EFC. I usually see somebody getting really happy about being older. Any money? We don't have a lot to celebrate. All right. And a guy who wants to admit it. All right. So it's relatively minimal. So that is to say, parent assets, good. Don't be afraid to claim an asset, because student assets, if your student truly has an asset, because usually the ownership is the parent, but if a student truly has an asset in their name that they own, they're assessed, no questions asked, 20% of that asset to be calculated in the EFC. So the kids get hit. But more often than not, parents, you own the asset, not your child. It may be on behalf of the child that you have an account. The child's not the owner, and that's good. So parent assets good, student assets not so much. Nope, no, cars or personal property, not part of the equation at all. So students, because they are placing their income on the FAFSA, if they had any in 2015, students could have earned up to $6,400 in 2015, senior students. That number changes every year, but currently it's $6,400 before any of that income would be used for their contribution for the EFC. All right? And $6,400 is kind of ambitious for a high school student. So more than likely, if your child worked, it's just held harmless. It's nil. And also keep in mind that if you have more than one child in school at the same time, your expected family contribution for the 2 children is divided equally. Okay, so that is to say, the simplest way to put it is, if I have 2 kids in school, that's good, right? It is. It's costing you more, but relatively speaking, you get sort of cut a break on the EFC. So, yes?
So on the assets, if there are, well, maybe you're going there, if there's specific 529 assets, it doesn't matter if you have multiple children, you're still going to list all assets regardless of the...
Great question. Yes, I am going to go there. So 529s are tuition account programs, right? Whether you have one for Pennsylvania or for any other state, which you might, you can invest in any state, 529 program. You have to list the value of the 529 on the FAFSA as an asset. It's always a parental asset. And if you have a 529 for more than one student, you must list the total amount for all of those 529 accounts. So even if you're reporting for a senior student, but you've got an upcoming freshman you have a 529 for, you got to report the value of both of those accounts while you're completing that senior student's FAFSA. If you have a Pennsylvania 529, you still have to list it on the FAFSA, the value of that as a parental asset, but FIA takes that out when you're completing the Pennsylvania State Grant application. So it's not held against you to have that account, or any account, if it's a Pennsylvania 529. Also, if you have bonds, this is chapter and verse. You have to report the value of those bonds. In order to find the value of those bonds, you can use this website that will help you figure out what is the value of those bonds. Also, something like UTMA accounts, UGMA accounts. If they don't sound familiar to you, you don't have one. But if you do, Those are always in the child's ownership. But a Coverdale Education Savings account could be owned either by a parent or a student. If this doesn't sound familiar to you, you probably don't have any, but the Coverdale, what you must be certain of is who owns that. Is it for the student or is it for the parent? And that you must also report on the FAFSA, the value of that, under either the parent or the student, who's ever the owner. Any questions? Hey, we're getting through this. Yes, ma'am.
So as far as 529
Yes.
plan, I'm just going to throw out a number. Let's say you have $10,000, and let's say the tuition for your child's college is $20,000 for a year. So how does that get distributed?
So the question is if you have a 529, say that's worth $10,000, but a school's tuition costs are $20,000, how does that get distributed? That's up to you.
So like you would do like $2,500 a year? Or?
That is completely up to you how you use that account.
Okay, so the college doesn't.
No, the college does not determine how you use a 529. Nope. You take that out as you see fit, and a couple of things about that. Remember, you're not obliged to use a 529 immediately. You don't have to use it in your student's freshman year. If you can afford the freshman year, which tends to be more heavily covered than any other subsequent years as your child's in school, right? And when you see me go like this, things are more expensive, right? So if you can cover the initial years by not using the 529, use it in the junior year, use it in the senior year. If you're absolutely certain your kid's set for graduate school, use it at the graduate school level. Because that's when the rubber really meets the road as far as costs. There is no financial aid for graduate work except for student loans. And student loans have an aggregate limit. So if you can afford not to use a 529 immediately, it might behoove you to use it down the road instead. But the schools don't determine that. That's up to you and the Department of Treasury. Yes.
So in that example, though, we used it all in the freshman year. Would it affect your expected payment contributions subsequently?
So if you use a 529 initially, and so there is no asset any longer, sure, it's going to make an impact on financial aid down the road. Whether that impact meets the threshold where it really makes a difference, I don't know. That's based on everything else. But sure, it's going to affect your assets because you're going to have fewer. Yes, ma'am.
Unvested shares of stock.
Unvested shares of stock. Could you tell me another term for those? I don't know what an unvested share of stock is.
The share that's in an account that isn't
Is it reflected on your W-2?
no.
Is it reflected in your adjusted gross income?
No.
Is it untaxed? Untaxed income, do you get a dividend from that?
I get a dividend and it's taxed.
That dividend is going to show up somewhere on your W-2 and you're going to have to report that. Yep. I'm going to guess that's in box 12. All right, so, yes, ma'am.
Do you have a ballpark number for like how much your income has to be for this not get any?
No, and I really wish I did. The question was, do I have a ballpark number where I could say to you, you're absolutely not going to get any aid? I do not, because there's so many variables. It's the number of people in your household, the number of students in college at the same time. But I will tell you this, the student aid guide that you have will show you as far as the state grant, what income levels and who gets the state grant. But the problem with a question like that is this. Remember, we're concentrating on need-based aid. And you could have a ridiculously high income and fabulous assets, but the school will still reward your student with financial aid because that school would like to recruit your student. So don't mistake need-based aid for what else the schools might be able to provide your student. It might be that you're ineligible for federal and state aid, but your kid's going to get a great package from the school simply because of the nature of that school and the nature of your student. Yes?
So I have a CSS question. And the question is, you said the CSS does not have the IRS data retrieval tool. So do we go and edit the information, or does it want time or something?
You know what, I couldn't hear you completely.
I think she's asking the CSS, since it doesn't have the IRS data retrieval tool.
Correct.
Once she enters the information, can she correct it, or once it's entered, it's entered?
All right, so I get that. Here's the thing. I'm not an expert on the CSS profile. So I can't answer that. I don't know. I can tell you that an element of it is not the IRS data retrieval tool. But the mechanisms for making corrections on the CSS profile, I'm really not certain. It is a College Board product.
Yeah, actually I've done that already in field for it, based on the last year's IRS information that I have.
The only thing I can tell you is direct that question to the school that requires the CSS profile. I'm sorry. So you've sat through this really engaging, fun presentation for this. Regrettably, there's not a whole lot of need-based aid out there, but this is what is available to your student. There is the Pell Grant. The maximum award annually, $57.75. It goes to the neediest of students. The Pell Grant is directly related to your expected family contribution, which is that number that's devised from the information you put on the FAFSA. So if your student is eligible for a Pell Grant, you'll actually see that on the confirmation page. That's the only thing you'll see on the confirmation page because it directly relates to your EFC. These other things on this slide listed as campus-based aid are actually federal funds that the campuses distribute. And each campus distributes them differently. So, IUP, Clarion, and Slippery Rock are 3 state system schools, but each one of those schools could offer the FSEOG, work study, and the Perkins loan very differently for your student. One school could give all 3 programs to your student. One school, state schools, might give 2. One school might just give 1 to your student. It depends on how they disperse their campus-based aid. All right? So that's another reason why some schools could appear to be unaffordable, and then something like this makes them, something like these campus-based aid programs, makes that school affordable in the end. So the bottom line is these are also dispersed based on your FAFSA information. The FSEOG stands for Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, and the maximum amount of that is $4,000 per year. There is federal work study, which is something that the financial aid officer at each school determines for your student. A typical work study award is about $1,500 a semester. Okay, and the thing about work study means your student must work off that money. In all the years I've been doing this, there's not a better way to say that. I always have this impression of a kid making license plates somewhere in a basement in Old Main. But work study, it can be a very valuable work experience for your child. It could have something to do with their major, or it might not. But the fact is, they got to work off that award, and they're paid at least minimum wage, usually more at the schools. If you've been visiting schools, you'll see kids staffing, workstations. Your tour guides are probably work study students. The kids cutting the grass, cleaning the tables in the dining halls, all of that, those are work study jobs. So they don't pay the bills necessarily because the bill is due before that work is done. Right? And there's also no guarantee about work study. So if you see an award letter that indicates a work study job for your student, the next question is, how do I get my kid that job? Because it's not guaranteed. The award is there, but the job needs to still be had. Right? So you got to get your kid to know at each school, does it happen at orientation? Is there a separate application? You know, how do I get my job at that school? And then some schools are offering, again, what's called a Perkins loan. This was on the chopping block in September. It actually was a program that was eliminated by the feds, and they reinstituted it just a couple weeks ago. The Perkins loan is a loan directly made from the school to your student. It's outside of the federal realm. It's not a student loan per se. It's a Perkins loan. The great thing about a Perkins loan is that no interest accrues while your student is in school. So all things considered, your kid's looking at two different schools. One can offer a Perkins loan, one does not because they don't participate. Right? And everything else is the same. Sure, choose the Perkins loan option. Right? Because that money, again, is interest-free for the course of your student's school term. Now, when they graduate and they stop out, a Perkins loan interest rate is 5%. It's been 5% since forever. So it's really actually a good loan in terms of loans. So these are federal programs. And then the Pennsylvania State Grant, which was underfunded just recently in this preliminary budget by $11 million. But currently, the rate for the maximum amount for the Pennsylvania State Grant is $4,300. You can see if your student goes outside of Pennsylvania, they get virtually, either they get no state grant or virtually no state grant, where the maximum amount would be $600, right? So it's just those 6 states that are still what we call reciprocal states. So if your kid's going to go somewhere other than DC, Delaware, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, or West Virginia, they're not going to get a state grant that they can port into that state. And those other states don't bring their state dollars into Pennsylvania either. So it's sort of a, we don't play with them and they don't play with us. Now there's other state programs that are available to students. We call them from FIA special programs. And each one of these things on this list has very specific criteria and meets a very specific audience. So I'm not going to go into all of them, but what I would recommend is in that student aid guide that you have, the criteria for each and every one of these is available. Just a couple things I'd point out to you is that there is a state work study program. So if your child's not eligible for the federal state work study guidelines, there's a state alternative that they may be eligible for. That's good news. I would also draw your attention to, it's 1, 2, 3, the third bullet from the bottom, the Pennsylvania Targeted Industry Program. That is designed for students who are pursuing technical education. So a program less than 2 years in either the energy area, agriculture, or manufacturing at an approved school. And there's hundreds of them throughout the state. So if your student's not going to traditional 2-year school or 4-year school, but wants to drive a truck for the shale energy industry, right? Or wants to get into, wants to be a machinist, wants to do diesel mechanics, they may qualify for the TIP program. And then lastly, the second one from the bottom, the Ready to Succeed Scholarship. This is a program that's only in its 2nd year. That is designed for students who are in school, college, who have achieved at least a year's worth of coursework and have at least a 3.25 grade point average. They may qualify for the Ready to Succeed Scholarship. There's no separate application for those students. Their schools nominate them. And the average income for families who have a, what we call RETS, or Ready to Succeed candidate, is about $90,000. So RETS, or Ready to Succeed, is to address students who are high achieving from upper middle income families. The reason I bring that up is not only to tell you that that exists, but also to just put a plant in your brain that once your student is in college, there are scholarships available to them from the schools themselves and from outside sources. And those scholarships request from them that they can show they can do college level work. Right? So they typically say, you know what, if you're in the biology department and you've earned at least a 3.5, we're gonna reward that. So don't forget that what you see in the freshman year, there can be more if your student is doing well. Right? Because the schools are more apt to invest in them because they've demonstrated they're gonna succeed. They're gonna get in and get out. There was one thing I just wanted to mention before I moved on. What any of those slides didn't address is the school money, right? So I showed you federal aid, state aid, special programs, but do not forget that the schools themselves have their own dollars from the endowment, from the alumni funds, from the different academic departments. That's the other part of this pie. I can't show you that because I have no idea where your kids are going to go, and there's 34 schools, 3,400 schools across the country. So ultimately what you're going to find is that your student's going to receive a financial aid award from any of the schools who still believe your student is going to enroll there. And that typically begins around April, definitely after May 1. So, you know, the early spring, currently. And that's an official notification of what your student is going to receive in terms of aid. It typically will show what your student is going to receive not only from the feds, the state, but also from the school itself. And when you get those award letters, they all will look differently. If your student is looking at more than one school, you know, if you try to compare them, it can be difficult sometimes because the language is different. Some schools, for example, on the award letter will show loans, right? They'll show a student loan in there, they'll show a parent loan in there, and so the balance will look relatively low. And if you're not astute enough to take out that loan, you don't realize that, wait a minute, that's not a zero balance, that's money we have to borrow. So take a very careful look at those, and then also make sure you can answer these kinds of questions. How's that offer going to change from year to year? What conditions are on my student to keep those offers, right? To get a music scholarship, does my student have to participate in band? What if my kid doesn't like football and doesn't want to go every Saturday to a football game, right? Those kinds of things. So you have to look at the conditions and make sure you understand, and if you don't, these are questions you want to ask the financial aid office. Not so much admissions, but financial aid for true answers. And keep in mind, when you see those award packages, do not have any expectation that they're going to meet your need entirely. In fact, there are very few schools that do meet the needs of families entirely. Some of the schools that do might surprise you. Harvard does, for example. Right? But that's in a different realm for a lot of us. So when you see what your out-of-pocket costs might be, that's what gets us to the four-letter word of loan. It could be four-letter for another reason, I don't know. And loans, or the notion of whether or not your student needs to take out a student loan, is really the last part of this process for a couple of reasons. It's the last part because you don't want to think about it right now. It's the last part of this process because you need to wait and see what your bottom line is. It's also the last part of this process because if your student is borrowing, they need the assistance of their final school choice to enable that borrowing to occur. The schools have to certify your student for the loans. Right? So this happens typically for families in July, August, September. It might be when you attend orientation, and if it's a really good school, they're going to explain what your student's financial aid package is, and you're going to know right then and there, we're going to have to take out a loan. Or we want to take out a loan. A lot of families have their students take out federal student loans so that the student has some skin in the game and has a vested interest in their own college costs. But whenever you decide on whether or not a loan is a possibility, we highly recommend that for students in particular, that they utilize federal student loans first. Some of us, don't nod your heads because we're going to age each other. Some of us might remember that federal student loans used to be called guaranteed student loans. See, I told you not to nod. Then they were called Stafford loans. Now they are called direct student loans because there are no middlemen anymore. There's no banks or lenders involved in this process. Students borrow directly off the federal government since 2009. So we recommend students look to federal loans first because there are repayment plans associated with them, and they also can be discharged for death, which seems like a no-brainer, but is not necessarily the case with other types of loans. They can be discharged for permanent disability, and in some cases, in the case of bankruptcy. So they have some forgiving terms. Student loans, federal student loans could be provided to your student in a subsidized way, which means no interest accrues while your student is in school. That would be preferred, right? Or they could be unsubsidized, which means interest is accruing while they're in school. And who makes the determination of how your child gets either type of loan is actually their school choice. Your child is entitled to take out a student loan if they choose to. If they don't have a need for that loan, it's going to be unsubsidized. If they demonstrate a need for it, it will be subsidized. And again, the determination is made by the school. And these are the interest rates currently. This will change come July. This is based on the Treasury bill, so you know that our interest rates just were increased a little bit. As they are increased, so will these interest rates. But these interest rates for student loans are in effect for a calendar year. They're not variable throughout the calendar year. But your child could have a completely different interest rate as a sophomore student or junior or senior than they did as a freshman. Because they are what the government calls fixed variable. So now the feds say your child has every right to borrow, but the federal government puts a limit on what they can borrow. So it's $5,500 the first year, $6,500 the second year, and then $7,500 beyond that. And that's based on the number of credits that they have. Yes, ma'am?
What happens when they graduate? Is the unsubsidized loan from every year all lumped together, or are they separate loans that they have?
That's a really good question. When a student graduates, the sum total of all of their loans can be consolidated into one particular interest rate, or they can choose to pay them as sort of ad hoc as they came to them. If there's anything that you can afford to do, for example, if your child gets an unsubsidized loan, or you choose for them to have an unsubsidized loan because you want them to borrow, just again to have some skin in the game, if there's anything that you can do to really ruin every birthday, Christmas, and every other event that they have in their lives, pay their interest rate while they're in school, right? Pay their interest payments, because over the course of the 4 years that interest is accruing, if you can pay that, you're saving them thousands of dollars when they graduate. They won't like you because they can't get a hoverboard, but it's the best thing financially that you can do to really help them. Because as that interest accrues every year, when they graduate, that interest gets capitalized, so you're paying interest on interest. It's the worst possible financial thing you can have. So there are limits to what a student can borrow. Now, parents, the answer from the federal government for you in terms of loan is something called the Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students, or the PLUS. But much different story here. Whereas we recommend students exhaust their federal student loan options, parents, the interest rate right now is 6.84% for a PLUS loan. And there's an origination fee that comes right off the top that's almost 4.3%. So the terms of the PLUS loan are really not great. This is the only resource for some parents who have no other resources, but it's quite possible that you have a lender, a credit union, someone you've done financial business with that could give you a loan for better than 6.84%. and no origination fees. It's really the origination fee that'll kill you, because that comes off the top. So, but the PLUS loan is very flexible, very lenient. Virtually no one is denied a plus loan. But it's the convenience store of loans. So for that flexibility, you pay for it. If you choose not to utilize a plus loan, or your student needs to borrow more, there are private loans, or what we call alternative loans. And these really have nothing to do with the federal government. So the terms are all over the place. And they're all based, just like any other loan, they're based on our credit history, our FICO score, etc., right? PNC, Discover, Sallie Mae, etc. These are the kinds of organizations that offer these educational loans, but they're private. So they all have very different terms, very different interest rates. You just must be really careful about when you borrow through a private loan. For the most part, private loans cannot be discharged for any reason. So death of the student, the cosigner would still be on the hook 99% of the time. Disability is not usually taken into consideration. Bankruptcy, never. Right? So once you're in these kinds of loans, you're in. All we recommend is that you look very carefully at the terms, the stipulations for these kinds of loans. So just in summary, yeah, there's some ways you can reduce the need for financial aid to begin with. I'm not going to belabor this point. A lot of this is just common sense, but I do want to say for the first bullet item that you see there is you got to get your kid to graduate in time. You didn't expect that they would be in high school for longer than 4 years. A bachelor's degree should not take any longer than 4 years. You got to make sure that the college that they are accepted to can see to it that they can get the courses that they need when they need them so that their progress is not impeded. Right? Lots of times, back in my day, being undecided was, touchy-feely and fine, except it's expensive now. The longer they are on a campus, the more expensive it gets. Tuition and costs increase at least 5% every year. So you're going to pay 20% more in that fifth year than you did in the first. And currently, just a fun fact for you, across the United States, just 30% of students are taking enough credits to graduate on time. So if you don't take enough credits to graduate on time, you have a shot in the dark of ever getting out of there on time. Most students are taking 12 credits or below. You got to take 15. That's 5 classes. Imagine, you could also take 18 and get out sooner. So, a couple things you can do now is apply for your FSA ID, particularly senior families. Also, if you'd like to know, because it's very important, if you'd like to have an idea whether you want to know the number or not, if you'd like to know what your expected family contribution is, there's plenty of mechanisms really online to do that. But if you do go to FAFSA.gov, on the home page, on the right-hand side, down at the bottom, there's something called FAFSA Forecaster. It's a summary of all the key pieces of information that the FAFSA asks for. Sometimes families say, I'd like a scenario. What if we do this or we do that? Well, check it out on the FAFSA Forecaster and see how it impacts your EFC. When we talk about a threshold, whether or not a certain amount of money really is going to make a difference. We'll plug in the numbers and see on the FAFSA Forecaster. There's, it's anonymous, none of that is tracked, so you can play around with it. But that can be a very helpful tool. Also, every school has a requirement to provide something called a net price calculator. And those are typically on the financial aid website. Net price calculators are intended to give your student an idea of what their net costs are, not what the sticker costs are. And some net price calculators are better than others. It's a software program. So it depends on what the school devised. Some of them are more tailor-made. Some are not, but again, they're intended to give you some basic information about what your bottom line would be. And also keep in mind that things will change, particularly junior families. It's going to be very interesting coming up, and I don't have a whole lot of solid answers about how it's going to go as far as when you're reporting income information that was from 2 years ago. What if it changes? What if your income has increased? What if it decreases? Here's what we all expect will happen. If your income increased over the course of those 2 years, you're not going to tell anybody. That's an assumption that the schools are making. But if your income decreases, loss of job, disability, God forbid, the death of an income earner, absolutely you want to tell the schools that. And then they have a human touch that they can apply to your information and make adjustments to your student's aid. So remember that, not just when your students are freshmen, but as they progress throughout their college career, keep the financial aid office in tune with what's going on. And regarding scholarships, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about.
Yes. No difference. The question was, how is need-based financial aid affected if a student chooses a private school? Same process, same information, same opportunities. But I will tell you that private schools tend to have a better ability to leverage financial aid because they have more resources.
Regarding scholarships, well, you can certainly do any sort of Google search to look for a myriad of scholarships all over the country. What we publicize here in the high school are the scholarships that are local, meaning local to Allegheny County, local to Western Pennsylvania. Some of them are even local, as in you went to Franklin Elementary School. So I just want to show you where we list them. They're in four different places. The first place, if you're a paper person, we always have a packet of the updated scholarships in the school counseling office. You can also go onto the website. So once you're in the home page, if you go to the schools and select the senior high, and then on the left-hand side, select school counseling. And then scroll all the way down on the left, somewhere here. There's a listing of all the scholarships. You see it? There it is. Scholarships and financial information. I'm a little rusty. I just returned from my maternity leave last week. So this is a listing of all the scholarships available currently, and they are coming in fast right now. So if your son or daughter hasn't started to apply for them yet, you're not too late, but we are in the season right now. A lot of them have a due date of March, April, some a little sooner. But you can read through these and see what the qualifications and criteria are for each one. Graduating senior in Allegheny County, attending a certain type of school, North Allegheny Foundation, a student with a GPA of 3.75 or higher with a desire to pursue academic excellence and an interest in a 4-year degree. And then it tells you where you can find the application. So some of them say application available in the school counseling office. We have a large drawer and they're alphabetized and file folders in that drawer. Some of them list the website, so you'll actually have to go onto that website and get the application. Many of the scholarships that we list in the school counseling office have very few applicants, as in 3 sometimes. Your students have a very good shot of getting one of these scholarships if they apply to several of them. The reason students don't apply to them is because they take a lot of work. A lot of them require several essays, several letters of recommendation, writing stories, poems. There's a lot of them in there for the arts. It might be submitting a piece of art. It might be writing something, an art piece. So there's just tons of them in here. And again, you're competing against people, maybe in Allegheny County, maybe just kids who went to a certain elementary school. So please, I encourage you to follow these scholarships and to encourage your students to apply. They're really all for seniors. There might be 1 or 2 that are available to junior students, and those would be junior students who are pursuing certain fields. There might be one on here that comes out later for students in engineering, something very particular like that. So they're listed here on the website. They're listed in a hard copy. We also have a Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, it's the Nash School Counseling Department is the name. You need to type in the Facebook search engine, and you just click like. And then in your news feed, you'll get a listing of all the scholarships and updates and reminders. And then we have a Twitter. It seems like the parents are following us on Facebook, the kids are following us on Twitter, but the Twitter is just at Nash Counselors. So those are all the different ways that you can see the scholarships that we talk about in the counseling office. That's what I thought.
Yep, yep.
Just want to mention that we also encourage a website called FastWeb. Now, what Jen mentioned were local scholarships, which, again, your student has a very good chance, probably, of actually earning. But national scholarships, obviously, are more competitive. But FastWeb is a really good, legitimate website. Your student has to create a profile. It takes 10 minutes, which, sometimes outlasts the time span that a student will want to spend. But I'm telling you, it's a very worthwhile 10 minutes for them to spend to build a profile. And then once they do that, FastWeb notifies them of every scholarship that comes around by date that the student could apply for. Then comes the hard part. They actually have to do it. But it's ridiculous. There is a lot of free money out there that just goes unawarded. Just want to mention to you, FIA makes available a website called My Smart Borrow. Go back. Fastweb.org. Why didn't it do it? There we go. I'm sorry, fastweb.com. FIA also makes a website available called My Smart Borrowing. It's interactive. It allows a student to input their career and where they would like to work. So it's geographically tempered, right? Because we tend here in Western PA not to maybe have the salaries that you do in the state of California or over in Philadelphia, and cost of living is a part of all that, etc. We know that as adults, but it allows the student to put in their career interests, determine what their expected salary is, and then also compare that to what they expect to pay for their college investment. And it allows them to see, are you thinking in a good way? Are you going to spend $125,000 on a career and only make, $20,000 a year? Or whatever. Ridiculous example, but it's really a very good website we encourage you to look at. This is promoted in all of our materials as well. And so with that, I will say this, I want to have a formal closing for the program and thank you all for attending. So if you have a general question, please ask me. If you have a really unique situation or something particular, I would encourage you to email me or call me or come on up and see me afterwards. But are there any general questions? Yes, sir.
I do, actually. The first is you told us about the change in the rules date of FAFSA. The schools have deadlines by which you have to apply. Since the availability date is moving forward, is it anticipated that the school requirement dates might also?
I love you for asking that. God willing. That's the intention. The question was, will the school's deadlines change next year because the FAFSA will be available earlier? That is the absolute intention of the federal government to have that happen. But they can't compel the schools to do that. So I don't know what you're going to see next year because there's a little bit of pushback from the schools, but I think ultimately they're going to see that this is absolutely that should be happening. Excellent question. Yes?
So, I'm already paying a student loan for my wife who I put back through school. Does that count somewhere in?
Nope. Debt is not a part of the FAFSA or any part of the consideration, but it also, because you are paying on a student loan, would not affect your student's ability to borrow on a student loan. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm about 80% through the FAFSA application. I didn't see any button for the data retrieval.
You wouldn't. The data retrieval tool you would not see until February 1st when it becomes available, because the assumption is that's when people will really have the ability to start filing their taxes. And when you're faced with the data retrieval tool is when you answer the question that you have filed your taxes. So because probably right now you indicated I will file, you won't see it. And because it's not February 1st, you wouldn't see it as well. good question as well. Yes, sir.
I don't know how general the question is, but we don't need any help for tuition, discovered by any help, whatever. So we need something for room and board. What's the right way to proceed?
On the FAFSA,
Whatever, I just don't know.
as far as room and board,
Yeah,
You
just
sh-
room and board.
you should have your student indicate that they plan to live on campus and and have room and board factored in
To indicate where,
at any school choice that they're looking at. On the FAFSA?
on the path.
Yep,
Right?
absolutely. It asks for the housing intentions.
Okay.
You're welcome. All right, folks, thanks very much. Have a good night. Good luck to you all, and if you have any questions, keep me in touch. Thank you.